like to do. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Ian Durbach, and I work at the University of St Andrews at the Centre for Research into Ecological and Environmental Modelling. This session is on study design, and in particular we're going to be looking at deciding where to put cameras in a single survey region. So just a quick overview of the talk. I'm going to spend 5 minutes on each of these 3 topics. We're going to look at some key ideas just underpinning the logic behind survey design for spatial capture recapture. Then we'll look at some example designs just to illustrate those key ideas. And then I'll show you some useful software that you can use to help your designs. But before I start with the sort of the main details, I just wanted to mention two things. The first of these is that just in this 15 to 20 minutes that I have, I'm only going to be able to cover a tiny bit of what's out there in terms of study design. And if you want more information, a good place to look is the PAWS website. There's the URL in the title of the slide. There's a whole bunch of PAWS tools that we're creating and adding to all the time that have additional information, particularly on the choice of survey areas, or if you're surveying a really big area, then your first task is really to choose which parts of that area you want to survey, so your survey regions. We call that macro level design, and that's not something that I'm going to talk about at all in the talk, although we can discuss it later on if you like. So the second thing is I'm a statistician, and that's my office in the right hand photo, and that's about as close as I ever get, unfortunately, to snow leopard habitat. But I really hate the idea of survey design as a kind of a set of GPS coordinates that get emailed to an ecologist or snow leopard researcher, and that's the end of the discussion. That's where you have to go. That's not the way it should work at all. So I think of survey design as a collaboration between the statistician or survey designer and the snow leopard expert or the ecologist. Survey design needs to be informed by what's currently known, and so that can be what's known about the survey region in terms of what areas are inaccessible, how many cameras are available, how much money and time is available, what's known about animal density and detectability in the region, what covariates are important in the region, and so on. And that's stuff that the ecologist has to provide. That information will get passed to someone like me, and I'd come up with a draft design, but that would hardly ever be the end point. For some reason, those designs almost surely will have something wrong with them. They might ask you to go to areas that may not be totally inaccessible, but that are very, very difficult to get to, things that I just haven't thought of. So that's that process needs to loop back to the ecologist, and we need to understand why that initial survey wasn't that great. And so this process can go back and forward a number of times before it sort of converges on something that both parties are happy with. So in this talk, I'm going to talk pretty much exclusively about the statistical properties of good survey designs. But I just wanted to put it out there that I don't see this as something that the statistician does alone by any stretch. Okay, so what's the overall goal of survey design? Well, for camera trap surveys, what we really want to do most of the time is estimate abundance or density precisely and without bias. So what do we mean by this? Well, let's look first at the without bias part. So after a camera trap survey, one of the things that the kinds of statement that we'd like to make is we estimated snow leopard density to be 1.1 animals per 100 kilometers squared. Now, if we look at that 1.1, we know we're not going to be right. We're not going to be exactly right with our survey, sort of to 5 decimal places or whatever. We know that sometimes we're going to be a little bit high, sometimes we're going to be a little bit low. But what we want to avoid is having this estimate being consistently too high or too low. So if that is the case, then our surveys are biased, and usually our results or density estimates are biased, and usually the cause of that is that our survey design is biased. And how do we avoid bias? Well, we avoid bias by avoiding sampling mainly good or mainly bad habitats. We need some kind of a randomization or some process by which we sample a range of habitats. So that's bias. If we look at precision a bit more carefully, another thing that we'd like to say at the end of our survey design, at the end of our survey, is to give some kind of an assessment of how uncertain we are in our estimates. So we won't just say we estimated snow leopard density to be 1.1 per 100 kilometers squared. We'd say something like we estimated snow leopard density to be somewhere between 0.9 and 1.4 animals per 100 square kilometers with 95% confidence. And what we'd really like is for this confidence interval to be as narrow as possible. And that's what we mean by precise estimates. How do we do that? Mainly through getting a big sample size. For spatial capture recapture, sample size is quite a complicated concept, and there's more than one kind of sample size. The first thing that we want is we want to detect a large number of unique animals. So we want to see many animals. This tells us something about how densely animals populate the landscape. The second kind of sample size is detections other than the first time we see an animal. So these are recaptures in the spatial capture recapture part. And this tells us something about the detection process. Basically tells us how many animals we are missing. The reason why we need recaptures is that we need to estimate this detection function. The detection function relates, it has two parameters, P naught and lambda naught, and sigma. And it basically relates the probability of seeing an animal, or the number of times we see an animal, to the distance between that animal's activity center and the camera. We need to estimate this function, and recaptures give us a way of doing this. So the difficulty here is that to see a lot of animals, we basically want to put our cameras far apart. We want to cover a large area. That's the way that you see a lot of animals. But to get a lot of recaptures, we want to put our cameras close together. So if we see an animal on one camera, we tend to see it on many cameras. And so you've got this tension between trying to see a lot of animals and trying to get a lot of recaptures. And that's one of the things that makes camera trap survey design difficult. And what makes it even more difficult is that we want recaptures, not just any kind of recaptures, but we want recaptures at various distances. And the reason for that is we need to estimate this detection function at a whole bunch of distances. So if we get all of our recaptures at one distance, that's not going to give us very good estimates of the detection function. We need recaptures at a whole lot of different distances. And so that complicates things further. So although it's a hard problem, we can replace our vague design goal, estimating abundance precisely without bias, with these four items, which I think of as like a checklist. We want to capture enough unique animals. We want enough recaptures. We want enough recaptures at various distances. And we want to avoid sampling good or bad habitats preferentially. So this is kind of like a checklist or things to think about when you evaluate or propose any new design. These things can all be evaluated by simulation, and I'll show that at the end of this talk. But they can also, you can get a long way with just common sense, or just thinking about these things. And so what I'll do now is we'll look at a couple of examples. And most of these will be sort of designs that are not good, but I think that they illustrate some of the concepts. So this is a survey region just south of Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan. It's some 13,000 square kilometers, so it's a bigger survey region than what you typically survey with one camera trap array. But it kind of it'll allow us to look at some different designs and see whether these are good or bad. So the first thing that we'll do is just zoom into the survey area, and we chop up the whole survey region into these small grid cells. I've made them 1.5 kilometers squared, but that's not terribly important, and any kind of similar sort of size grid cells will do. The important thing is that our survey design is only going to tell us which cells to visit. Once we've chosen those cells, we leave it up to the researcher to choose the best camera location within each cell. And that's a decision that can be made beforehand, or it can be done on the ground during the survey. So all the survey design does is picks which cell to visit. To start with, we'll assume that we don't have any other information about the survey area. So no covariate information, and we'll assume that there's constant snow leopard density across the survey region. These assumptions are appropriate when we don't know very much about a survey region in advance. Okay, so here's one design that doesn't work. It doesn't work because the cameras are too far apart. So here, for reference, I've put one home range down as this blue circle. Here, this assumes a sigma of about 4 kilometers, which is sort of typical, for snow leopard surveys, but might be bigger or smaller, depending on which survey region you have. So here, although the cameras cover a large area and so are going to detect a lot of animals, an animal that has an activity center at near one camera has almost no chance of being detected at another camera. So this survey design is going to capture very few recaptures, going to detect very few recaptures. And so it's inappropriate for analyzing with spatial capture-recapture methods. This design suffers from exactly the opposite problem. Cameras are too close together. So here it's useful, here there's two problems. The first is that the camera trap array covers a tiny area, and so it's going to capture very few animals, very few unique animals. The second problem is that if you think about the detection function, if an animal has its activity center near the camera trap array, if it's detected on one camera, it's probably going to be detected on some others, and that's good. But those distances are very, very similar. So we're only collecting information about the detection function across a very small range of distances. And we have probably almost no information in the tail of the detection function, which is what we really need for precise density estimates. So this kind of design, the cameras are too close together. This is a trickier case. In this case, the spacing between the cameras is appropriate. It's about 1.5 sigma, so there's 6 kilometers between cameras here. And we're just covering one snow leopard range, so we'll get some recaptures, and we'll get recaptures at a bunch of distances. But we're only just covering one home range, and so that means depending on animal density, we might not capture very, very many unique animals. That's one problem. And another problem is this blue circle, this home range. It's just a sort of an initial guess. If that guess is too low and the blue circle is actually a lot bigger, then we run into a similar kind of problem as we did on the previous slide, that we're not getting recaptures at a good enough range of distances. So this is sort of the best that you can do with 25 cameras, but it's not that great, and I wouldn't be that comfortable sending a design like this into the field. And probably the only way to improve this is by adding cameras. And this will become, we can actually check this specifically with simulation. I'm using the software I'll show later on. In this design, we've got clusters of cameras. So these are 4 cameras placed very close together, and then clusters of cameras placed far apart. This is, in general, a good way of covering a larger area and so increasing the number of animals that you detect. But here the problem is similar to one of the previous designs we've looked at, and that's that within clusters, the area covered by the cluster is too small. So again, thinking about the detection function, if you've got an animal with an activity center close to a cluster, it's going to be detected potentially across all cameras. But that's only a very small range of distances from the activity center. And so we run into the similar problem. With this design, we probably get a good number of animals. We'll get recaptures, but not recaptures at various distances. And that's what we need for precise estimates. So those are designs that are not great. These are a couple of designs that are good. So here, we've just expanded the number of cameras that we've got. We cover a good range. We've covered a couple of home ranges, so we'll get recaptures across a range of distances, and there's no reason to suspect bias. We don't need to put all our cameras together. If we want to use a cluster design, we can, but we need to make sure that each cluster covers a wide enough area that we're getting recaptures at a range of distances, and that's a minimum of one home range. And cameras need not be arranged in such a regular grid as what I've had on the previous slides. We can also have irregular arrangements of detectors. And in a heterogeneous landscape, that's kind of the rule rather than the exception. So something like this would be fine too. What happens if we have covariate information? So here we've got light blue indicating high elevation rugged areas, and dark blue indicating lower elevation flatter areas. If we've got covariate information and we want to use that to model density, so we want to know how snow leopard density varies with covariates, then we need to sample a range of those covariates. So in this case, if we want to model animal density as a function of elevation, we need to sample both high and low elevation points. So going back to the previous design, that's actually not a good design, because here we're only sampling areas in the light blue parts. So we're only sampling high elevation areas. This whole area, I should say, is below 5,000 meters. So there's nothing very high elevation. But we're only sampling sort of high elevation, favorable habitat. And so we won't be able to accurately estimate the relationship between density and elevation using a design like this. A design like this works because we're sampling both high elevation points in the south and low elevation points in the north. Okay, so that's just a very quick illustration of some possible designs and why they are or aren't desirable. I've used kind of hand-waving arguments for that. But the good news is that you can get, before you go out and do your survey, you can get kind of estimates of how precise your density estimates might be and what sample sizes you can expect. So the two main quantities that we've been talking about, sample size-wise, are the expected number of animals and the expected number of recaptures. And these can be calculated given some initial guesses about animal density and detectability, so P0 or lambda naught and sigma. We won't know much about these to begin with. And that's the whole point for doing this, the whole reason for doing the survey. But we can make some initial guesses, and so using these initial guesses, get some idea of the kinds of numbers of animals and recaptures that we're going to get. That'll allow us to rule out clearly bad designs. Of course, we might be wrong if our initial guesses are wrong, but it's the best that we can do. What's even better is that there's a recent paper, which I've listed down below, by Effort and Boulanger, that relates these sample size numbers to the variance of density estimates. And basically, the variance of density estimates is a function of the number of animals you see and a number of recaptures. That's an approximate relationship. So if you get at least 10 animals and get at least 10 recaptures, you can expect a CV of density of about 30%, 32%. If you get 20 animals and 20 recaptures, your CV goes down to 22%. If you get 40 animals and 40 recaptures, you get 16% CV, and if you get 80 animals and 80 recaptures, you would never get this, I guess, in a snow leopard survey. Your CV goes all the way down to 11%. So this gives you a way of planning your survey, linking your expectations about animal density and detectability to the expected number of animals you might recapture, and all the way through to estimated density. The variation or uncertainty that you expect in your eventual density estimates that would come out of the survey. There's a close link between CV and the width of confidence intervals. Here, we can talk about this in more detail, but here I'm just saying, if you have a 20% CV, then you can expect your confidence intervals for density to be about 40% either way of the density estimates. So your 95% confidence interval would range between 60% of density and 140% of your density estimate. And the reason why that's important is that that's quite a good CV by snow leopard standards, but it only gives you the power to detect changes that are quite big. So 30 to 40% changes in density are the kinds of sizes of changes that you can pick up with this kind of CV. Okay, so wrapping up, I said I was going to show some software. This is not something that we've developed at PAWS. It's something that's in the SECR design package that Murray Effort, who's one of the creators of spatial capture recapture methods, has designed. It's a Shiny app that gives you a web interface to the R package SECR design, and basically it's really simple to use, and will give you an idea of how many animals, of your expected sample sizes and your expected CV. So you start off by entering your initial guesses about your possible snow leopard density. So snow leopard density is something like 1 per 100 square kilometers. I've just had a guess here, and a sigma of 4 kilometers. Then you upload a text file with your potential camera trap locations. So I've just put in, this was the design with cameras that were very close together, which we know is kind of bad. And then the software runs some of these simulations and comes up with the expected number of animals that you expect to detect. Only 5 snow leopards, 20 recaptures, and an expected CV, which SECR design calls this approximate RSE of 47%. This is a really bad CV because we're only detecting 5 animals. So that reflects what we said, cameras are too close together, but we can put numbers to that, and that's really neat. This is one of the designs that we said was better. And here, I just point out that here we're detecting 20 animals. That's what we expect to get, 26 recaptures, and an approximate CV of 22%. Much better. Whether this is okay for a particular design, a particular survey, is something that each researcher would have to decide for themselves, but this gives you a quick and easy way of checking that. So I think I've gone a little bit over 20 minutes, but just to wrap up, these are the three summary points. These are sort of my current thinking on survey design for spatial capture recapture. It's a difficult problem, and guidelines are evolving, so it's something that we're actively working on as a research problem. But you can get a long way just by thinking through the 4-point checklist. Am I going to get enough animals, enough recaptures at different distances, and is there any danger of bias in my design? Fortunately, results from what I can see are fairly robust to precisely where you put the cameras, so long as you get things roughly right. And conventional guidance, which says that cameras should be placed 1 to 2 sigma apart, possibly for snow leopards, having them a few pairs of cameras closer than this to encourage recaptures is a good idea. The camera trap array must cover at least 1 home range, and preferably more. And if we're going to use covariates to model density, then you need to sample a range of those covariate values. This conventional guidance is a really good default option, and will get you precise estimates a lot of the time. Regular grids are a good way of achieving this, but in snow leopard habitat, they're often not practical. And then any kind of design should always be checked with simulation beforehand using the software that I've just shown, just to get an idea of what you can expect, and to check that that's your survey effort is not going to be wasted. And then just to emphasize that this communication between the field workers or ecologists and statisticians or anyone doing the design is really important. So we need to, I think, work towards getting this loop of this feedback loop between ecologists and the people designing the surveys to be much clearer and more open. And we need to, we survey designers need to be responsive to the challenges of sampling in difficult habitats and adapt these designs where needed. So at PAWS, what we're doing is we're supporting survey design in some of the snow leopard range countries, and we're learning as we go. We're developing training materials like this set of slides and accompanying videos. And we're doing some foundational research into improving ways of doing camera trap survey design. So I just point you to these two papers. The first is going to come out in the next couple of days in Methods in Ecology and Evolution, and the second should be out soon in Ecology, and is up. A preprint is up on bioRxiv. And these represents kind of state of the arts, not just for snow leopard survey designs, but for any camera trap or any spatial capture recapture designs, surveys. So it's an exciting time, I think, to be a snow leopard researcher. There's some new developments in survey design to make use of, and also it's a really nice survey, people working on survey design for spatial capture recapture methods are mainly applying their work in snow leopard surveys at the moment. These are two of the most recent and sort of cutting edge papers, and they're used for snow leopard surveys because they're so challenging. So I think it's an exciting time to work together and learn from each other. So with that, I'll end my bit of the talk and turn it over to you guys. So does anyone have any questions or comments?
Hi, Jan.
Hi, Zumai.
Nice talk, thank you. Very informative and very nice. So I had a question. What is the impact of like prey composition on survey design, camera trap design? Does it have an impact or not? I mean, in Waham National Park, in few areas we have like ibex and oriole in snow leopard range, but in the other part we have Marco Polo and oriole in snow leopard range. So will it impact like the density of the camera traps in the area?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think prey can affect your survey designs in a couple of ways. The one is that at some times of the year, you just won't find snow leopard in a particular area because, for example, the prey might not be there. They might migrate or something like that. So that would be something that would need to be, that's almost like an area that's not worth surveying at certain times of the year because of prey, because the prey aren't there. And so that would dictate when you do your survey, like in a particular area. But at a finer level of detail, if prey is an important covariate, then, or if it's expected to be an important covariate, then the same thing that I mentioned with the elevation applies. We need to sample areas that are both have the prey there and areas that don't have the prey, and then we could model snow leopard density as a function of prey presence, absence, or if it's possible to use the camera trap. This is much harder, I think, but if it's possible to get estimates of prey density in an area as well, then you can relate snow leopard density to prey density. So I think, yeah, to sum it up, it can either dictate when you do your surveying, or it could tell you, you could treat it as a covariate, and so you should that would tell you should put some cameras in areas where the prey are relatively abundant and some cameras in areas where they're not abundant. That will allow you to model snow leopard density as a function of prey density. I just saw, I didn't see this before, but we've got Chris Sutherland, who's another one of the PAWS statisticians working on survey design. Was on one of the papers that I showed there. So on the last slide that I had. So I just wanted to say hi to Chris, and if he wants to chip in at any time, that would be Yeah, very welcome. Hi, Chris.
Okay, hi Ian, hi everybody.
Hi, Chris. Nice seeing you.
You too, Zamai. Nice to see you. So far I just Ian gave a good summary of the state of the art right now, and I just agree with what he said in response to the last question. Prey just falls into this category of covariates that you want to include information about when you're creating a design. But at the same time, it's a much trickier one because it's spatiotemporally dynamic. So you have to think about, okay, can we come up with good representations of what the prey distribution looks like, and that's much trickier. Sometimes you can go a level lower and say, well, we know that there's seasonal differences, but we also know that there's underlying kind of environmental factors that influence where prey are. So you can if you don't have that information of where and when prey are on the landscape, that's not necessarily a terrible thing. It would be ideal, of course, but you can use your understanding of the species and the system to make good guesses about where the species may or may not, the prey species may or may not be. But in a perfect world, you'd have a nice density map of prey, and then you'd include that just like the elevation example.
Hey Ian, I just wanted to ask one question. Hey Ian, Chris, can you hear me? Yeah. I just wanted to ask, have you come across any like real field studies where they examine alternative, like the alternative study designs? For example, here we have simulations, but has anyone done like real analysis of alternative designs, like maybe the grid, like the systematic design or random or clustered design? It would be wonderful to see if someone has done this type of analysis, not necessarily on snow leopards, but could be on other species as well.
Yeah, I'm sure that there have been some studies that have looked at actual, like the sensitivity of actual survey results to the design, but nothing comes to mind at the moment. I forgot, it is Joe Clark has a paper looking at clustered designs, and I think that I can put up a link, or I can email you a link, but I think that that's got to do with brown bear. But I must admit that I think the part that I remember from that paper is the simulation-based results rather than looking at sensitivity of actual results. Chris, do you know of anything?
Rahel Solomon has a paper called "How Does Study Design Influence Density Estimates from Spatial Capture Recapture Models?" and that it's primarily simulation based, but there is I think it's Jaguar. Oh no, it's black bear again. And what they do is they actually take quite a comprehensive and quite dense trapping array, and then they just start manipulating that to say, okay, well, let's just pretend. So here we have a really good design of kind of traps everywhere. Why don't we take away half of those traps and see what would happen if we pretend that we only had half of them out, or if we thin them out a little bit. So there's an example there. There's another couple of papers where people have done similar things, and I can dig those out and paste links to them in the chat. And if anyone can't actually get access to if they're paywalled, then just let me know and I can find ways of getting people the PDFs of those. But essentially, the citations, the reference lists in the two papers that Ian showed, one will be out next week, so that we can share that with this group, or we could probably even share the final version of it, the final draft version of it now, and then the other one is on bioarchive. So the two reference lists there actually give quite a comprehensive review of what's been done so far in at least in terms of spatial capture recapture designs. It's difficult. So one of the things, thinking about bears, they're fairly high density animals. They do well at, I mean, you can, a donut will bring one in from a couple of kilometers away. They're easy to monitor, relatively speaking. Snow leopards are extremely difficult. So it's almost, I would almost recommend against trying to do some of those experiments, because it's so hard to go out and put an array of cameras out, and then to imagine you'd manipulate a dense versus a sparse array. When you're trying to do some really important conservation work at the same time, it's a tricky trade-off, because ideally we'd go out and do an experiment. We don't have the resources to do the experiment. The closest, I guess, was in a study in Pakistan, where there was the same area monitored in consecutive years with two very different trapping arrays, a small dense array and a larger sparse array. And so that's a paper that's under review right now, with led by Ali Nawaz in Pakistan. And so that's a good, I mean, it's hard to really draw too many kind of general conclusions of that, but it is an interesting comment on, here's a system that we don't expect to change much between the 2 years studied, but two very different trapping designs, and it definitely influences the estimates for sure in predictable ways. So that's another one. But yeah, there's a few bits and pieces out there, and I'll try and put together a reading list for those who are interested.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Ian. Yeah.
Thanks, Gopal.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
It's nice to see like Ian, Chris, Gopal, Zalmai again.
Hi, Tan.
Yeah.
I just have one, in 2015-16, we did our National Snow Leopard survey. So the survey design was like, we had 4 into 4 kilometer, like 16 square kilometer grids throughout the snow leopard potential habitats, and then we placed a pair of cameras in each of those grids. So by looking at the data from the last survey, most of the individuals, I mean, like we have identified around 60 snow leopard individuals. So out of that, around 44, they had only one capture, whereas around 16 of them, they had around 2 to 3 recaptures, so at different locations. So we are now planning to have our second National Snow Leopard survey that's next year, 2021. So I was wondering, like, is our earlier design, like, are the cameras like quite, I mean, too far away from each other, which indicates that like there are very few recaptures. So I just want to have your views on this.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think it's something that probably everyone that does snow leopard survey designs, that's the core problem really, is these recaptures. It's just so difficult to get them. So you want to place cameras really close together, but if you place them too close together, it's not that informative about your detection function. I think I don't have an answer to this. Basically, it's just it's the thing that makes snow leopard surveys so hard. I think it sounds like the sample sizes that you're getting, if you are pretty good, that at least you have you've got like more than 40 animals, and if you're getting sort of 30 to 40 recaptures, depending on what distances those are, a pair, like how far apart the pairs of cameras are, if there are at least some that are sort of 2 to 3 or 4 sigma apart, that's pretty good, I would say. Whether you can do better, I think that's a question that these simulation tools that Chris and I and Mary Efford have been developing can help with. But I would guess that the gains that you could get are probably pretty limited. I think you're probably doing a really good job. I like that the bigger grid cells, 4x4, and then pairs of detectors in those grid cells. That sounds like a really good idea. a good way of balancing trying to see many animals and recaptures. But I would suggest getting in touch with Chris or Ian. Maybe something we could chat more about. That's kind of exactly what the PAWS support team is set up for. Chris, do you want to?
Yeah, Tandin, I'm curious whether the recaptures that you get are all within cell recaptures, or do you have between cell recaptures?
Yeah, some of the recaptures are like between two grids and 2 to 3 grids at the max, and some are within the grids. But
yeah, so that's good.
As I said earlier, sorry, as I said earlier, like around out of 60 individuals, around 44 individuals just had one capture. So I thought that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you look at typical spatial capture recapture data sets, you'll find that distribution is quite typical. Lots of individuals, but most individuals caught once, and then you see this kind of tail where you get far fewer individuals caught multiple times, especially with camera trapping elusive species. With small mammals, you get a nicer distribution, but that's typically I feel like that's the pattern, and it's hard. That's a tough nut to crack. Just increasing the probability that your camera actually detects an animal in the vicinity, because it's a needle in a haystack problem. The snow leopard is such a huge home range, and you have these little dots on the map, and you really have to hope that the snow leopard just finds itself in front of a camera. So a lot of the things that you can do that aren't necessarily simulation based are just really maximizing detection at the local level. So once you have your general area you want to put a camera, and I'm sure all of you do this anyway, is really making sure that the specific location that you place the camera really gives you the best chance of capturing an individual.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Tandin.
Do you mind if I just ask one more question, Tandin? Have you analyzed the data from that camera trap study? Are the estimates reasonable, and or do you feel like there's enough uncertainty there that you really want to you really have to make improvements?
Yeah, actually, like I wasn't really like part of that survey. Like some of our colleagues, they designed the survey as well as they did the analysis of the data. So as I said earlier, from 60 individuals identified, they have like estimated around 96 snow leopards in Bhutan. So as per our earlier estimates, I think that's a good number, but I'm not really sure like how the analysis process and all like went.
Yeah, so I would just add, this is a good group of people to add this kind of additional comment to, in addition to generating the data through a good design, it's also really important to make sure you're analyzing that data correctly. And a lot of the applications I see of spatial capture recapture in general are fairly standard, straight out the box analyses of just the camera trapping data, but there's a lot. Spatial capture recapture models do have a lot of flexibility to account for some of the known variation, sex structure, for example, or like Ian showed, you can have variation within a sampling. You can have within sampling array variation in density. So making sure that you communicate with people who have those skill sets to be able to make the most out of the data. And once you've got it in hand, then that's also that's another reason for PAWS' existence, is to make sure that we can couple people who have interesting questions with expertise in the analysis process. So moving forward, you can definitely work on getting good design, but looking back, you can't change those designs. So there's a balance here, making sure you can make most of the data looking back in order to best inform design looking forward.
Oh, thank you.
Does anyone else have a question? Or I think what would also be, what might be useful is just to share experiences of doing the survey, like Tandun's just shared. Does anyone have any other kinds of survey experiences that I'd like to chat about?
I think, Ian, so we did sort of comprehensive survey of snow leopards in Foxuno National Park in Durbach, where I right now work. So we also had the same problem. So we haven't analyzed the data. So, but looking at the pictures that we could, we have very few few recaptures. Some snow leopards have multiple recaptures in adjacent camera traps, but many other snow leopards have just one detection. So, and they are very far apart. Like, let's say one snow leopard is detected at the station number 1, and another will be some 10 kilometers far. So we use some 300 camera traps. We haven't analyzed the data, but the preliminary indication is like that. Yeah, we haven't analyzed the data. But so I want to add one more thing. So I was thinking of, because once you have resources, you know, let's say I have camera traps in my park and we can use that. Do you have any particular suggestion? Okay, this, you could try this. Once you have resources, you could try this alternative design. So let's say I have 300 camera traps and we have resources at our disposal. So can we do something like, okay, let's put 30 camera traps in one part of the area as a one design, and 30 camera traps or 50 camera traps in other part of the park is another design, something like that, because we have resources. And I was sort of interested in trying different alternative designs so that we can compare compare the sensitivity and compare the simulation results and the actual field results, something like that. Yeah.
So did you say you have 300 cameras?
We have 300 camera traps. That's crazy. Yeah, yeah, we got it from WWF. Yeah. So
okay, that's amazing. That's
pair them up, or that's 300 stations that you'll deploy.
So we have 150 plus stations, some 175 stations. Yeah.
My feeling is that, I mean, you can do a huge amount with 300 traps, and you could certainly do some comparisons between different kinds of designs, and there are some alternatives to the regular grid designs that have kind of been the standard for a long time that are coming out. So that would be possible. Part of me sort of wonders, there's so much variability and sort of luck involved. Well, it's variability, but call it luck involved in getting detections for snow leopard surveys for snow leopards, just because they're so hard to get recaptures for. That I think comparisons on a real data set, I'd want to check quite carefully beforehand that the kinds of differences that you're going to, because you will observe some differences, that's just by chance, whether those differences are going to be big enough to sort of outweigh the natural variation that you're going to get from survey to survey when you survey something like a snow leopard. And then I think, so that's the one thing, you can do something, but I would want to check that quite carefully, the natural variation in your capture histories. And the other thing is, I think with snow leopard, what I'm increasingly sort of realizing is that you actually need quite a lot of cameras. So just because the recaptures are so hard to come by, if you've got 40 cameras, say, it's really, really difficult to get anything with that. And so I think sort of the idea of taking, say, 30 cameras and putting them somewhere and 30 cameras and somewhere else, I think that in that case, the variation is going to totally swamp any differences you see. But if you could take 80 cameras or 100 cameras and compare them with a different design of 100 cameras, then I think you could probably say something meaningful. It's a lot of effort to put in, and I'd probably want to check quite carefully that the outcome of research like that is going to sort of be worth it. Yeah. but I think it's probably something that you could look at doing maybe as part, sort of, if you're doing surveys anyway, it's possibly something that you could look at incorporating into your plans. Yeah.
Thanks. That makes sense.
I have another question if that's okay with the time. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yes. So in Waha National Park, in few areas, we do like camera trapping to only understand the presence and absence of snow leopards. It's not really designed for a population survey or density survey of the leopard. So can we is that helpful if we design a proper survey? I mean, the presence absence data that we are actually using now.
I think you would use the kind of design that you would use for a presence absence survey is quite fundamentally different to what you would use for trying to get abundance estimates, because you're not, the design that we're using for getting density or abundance is assuming that we're going to use spatial capture recapture, which is, if you're doing presence absence, you're not doing. But what we've done in Mongolia is to use presence absence surveys, the results from presence absence surveys, to inform designs for spatial capture recapture, and that's worked really well. So we've used presence absence results to stratify, to identify sort of very favorable, medium favorable, and relatively unfavorable habitat, and then put cameras in each of those areas. The presence absence surveys were done just by looking for, well, there were village surveys and looking for marks, scrapings and scat and things like that. So it wasn't camera trap presence absence surveys. But I think the same could apply in your case. You could use the outcome of the presence absence surveys to inform later camera trap SCR surveys. But in and of themselves, I think they're fundamentally different, presence absence and spatial capture recapture. No, Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree that if you think about the underlying assumptions of both, or the basic assumptions of both, is that in occupancy you want to maintain some independence with your sampling locations, whereas with spatial capture recapture you really want to kind of have clusters so individuals can be captured. So it's the tension between the two assumptions that's the fundamental difference Ian was talking about. So so one thing we've been playing with is using these design algorithms to actually use fixed design, so something like a presence absence survey, for example. So you use that as a fixed design, and then you find optimal locations of a secondary set of cameras. So imagine the case where you've got 300 cameras. You can take 150 and find the optimal design under some criteria, and then use that as the fixed set to find 150 new locations around those locations. And the reason we're interested in that is because, for exactly the reason you say, Zalma, you have an established protocol, so you want to maintain that for kind of longer term presence absence surveys and looking at dynamics potentially of presence absence over time. But maybe I don't know, maybe an organization gives you an extra 100 cameras, so you want to think, okay, how can I sensibly deploy these extra cameras on top of the design that I have already? So those are some things that might be worth considering. You can imagine the same thing for trying to test different designs. So you can test your one design with half of your cameras, and then you establish that as your design, and then you throw in the other ones using the first set as fixed locations, and you can evaluate the value of having that second set. And I think that's one way, I believe, of getting closer to cluster designs. So cluster designs, I think, are the designs that we want. But there's so many decisions to be made in cluster designs. How many cameras per cluster? What is the between cluster? What's the best between cluster distance? What's the best within cluster distance? And where do you start your clusters? And that kind of has an effect of where the rest of the clusters go. So finding, I think this is more of a research question or a research comment now rather than a practical one, but I think cluster designs in snow leopard studies in particular are really probably the ones we want to get, so you can maximize your probability of getting a detection of a snow leopard when it's in a particular area, but at the same time get those between cluster captures so we can inform the spatial process. I think that's an outstanding challenge right now, is how do we, what is this hierarchical design, this gold standard hierarchical design where you have clusters and then you have a grid, but each point on the grid represents a cluster.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Ian.
Great, thanks. I think I just wanted to, I don't know if you've seen Kostub's note that's popped up, or if it just comes to me saying that there's 2 or 3 minutes left now in this session. Have you seen that? Yeah. I think we'll just get kicked back to the main meeting room, so I don't think we actually need to do anything. So I think we could probably keep chatting until that happens. Does anyone have anything else they want to discuss?
And if anyone, now that I realize that we're going to stop being in this breakout room, I'm thinking about how I get this reading list to people. Maybe if anyone's interested in access to those design papers, just out of interest, if you either email Ian or myself, one of us can make sure to give you a copy of the reference list from both papers.
Yeah. I think maybe also, since things are wrapping up, maybe now is a good time to say if anyone is designing a camera trap survey and would like someone to have a look over it or to help with the design, also please just get in touch with Chris or I, and that's sort of what we're here for, and we can sort of be involved as little or as much as you like. It's really up to you, but I think there's lots of exciting and challenges really with developing camera trap surveys for snow leopards. So yeah, they're exciting times to work in.
May I?
Yes, please.
Yeah, as I said earlier, we will be conducting our second National Snow Leopard Survey next year, that's 2021. So currently we are procuring camera traps and other accessories, and yeah, we would definitely need your help in designing the next survey. So for sure we will get to you, both Ian and Chris. We would really need your help.
Great, I would be happy to help. And it sounds like you did a great job in the last survey. And it's nice to be able to go back. Will you be surveying the similar kind of area, or?
Yeah.
So it'll be exciting to be able to try and find annual, temporal variation in densities, and also probably improve. The more data you collect, improve the precision of your existing estimates.
It would be good if there was a report of that study. It would be interesting to see it. I'm sure it exists somewhere. If you're able to point us to that, to the work that was done in the last survey, that'd be interesting to see.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the issues, another thing that makes snow leopards difficult to survey is just that this seasonal variation in survey effort that's possible, that you can only really go and put out cameras at certain times of the year, and then you've got to come back and collect them sort of much later. So I think there's also sort of changes in prey availability and things like that. So I think that also trying to model that, include those sort of constraints on the kind of survey effort that's possible, is that's also something that I found quite challenging when trying to design surveys. There's a limited time window. If you're trying to reuse a camera in another location, there's a very limited time window for going to get that camera.
And these are the things that, from a statistician's perspective, there's certain things that we're able to do that will contribute to these efforts. But all of your collective knowledge of the systems really present a realistic representation of what the actual problems are on the ground in terms of the biology of the species, the terrain that you're working in. So it's really bringing those kind of real life problems to the problem solving statistical framework. But I think that's the best way to move forward here, is if we keep having this open dialogue between people who are running into challenges on the ground, whether it be accessibility or whether it's data limitations, and making sure those are factors that we in front of a computer are feeding into our kind of thought process of, okay, what are the challenges that we need to solve here.
Yeah, I think it's important for the people like Chris and I to have a good appreciation for what's happening on the ground. So maybe what we need to do is to be invited on some actual field work. We can get a cool background photo like Alexander or Narayan. I'm not sure whether we'd sign up for that though. That looks difficult. Right, I think we're going to be. I think this is the last minute or so. So I'd just like to thank everyone for coming along to the session. Thanks for participating in the discussion. I hope it's been useful. And yeah, just to reiterate, please do get in touch if you have any follow-up questions. We've just covered a very small sort of section of what's out there. Those papers will be out, it sounds like, in the next couple of weeks, and we're happy to share them in the meantime if you get in touch by email. So yeah,
sure, thanks. Yeah, it would be great. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I joined a bit late, and it would be great and wonderful if I can reach you and just get access to some of those papers. Not for snow leopards, but for Persian leopards in Iran.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, sure. I was wondering if Chris's email address has changed. Is it still UMass, or has it changed to the St. Andrews one?
I use both, so I put both of my email addresses in the chat there. So feel free to get, if you want to get in contact, you can use either one of those.
Okay, sure. Thanks.
Okay, I think this room's going to close, so it's really nice to see everybody. Thanks, Ian, for the talk. That was super interesting. maybe time moves differently in Kastoob's world than it does mine. I feel like he gave us the 5-minute warning 15 minutes ago.
Yeah. I kind of half wonder what happens if we just leave the room.
Oh, do you think that's what he meant?
I don't think so. I think he said the rooms will close. That's what we were told. I think it's the kind of thing that you can't do an experiment though. Once someone's gone, they won't be able to come back and tell the others what to do. Shall we? Let me just check my email from Justine. It says you'll automatically return to the main session.
Oh, Solve My Problems have been happening simultaneously.